some landscapes don't just endure, they remember. They absorb the ancient grievances, the spilled blood, the silent betrayals, until the very earth itself hums with a malevolent sentience. These aren't just tracts of land. They are cursed states. Pockets of the world where the natural beauty is merely a thin veil over an enduring predatory darkness that feeds not on fear, but on sacrifice. We often imagine curses as a localized event, a single haunted house, or a blighted town. But the most insidious ones, they are topographical. They encompass an entire region, a valley, a mountain pass, slowly, meticulously drawing everything within their bounds into a horrifying cyclical ritual. And nowhere has understood this more intimately than the remote mist-shrouded expanse known in hushed whispers as Graffin Valley. Graffin Valley. The name conjures images of ancient stone of rolling hills cloaked in perpetual mist. It's a place of stark, haunting beauty, dotted with mysterious weathered stone, Cairns' ancient burial mounds or markers their origins lost to time. For generations, this valley has been known for its peculiar isolation, a quiet, self-sufficient community, fiercely resistant to outsiders and marked by an unsettling tradition of leaving offerings at these cairns, particularly during times of hardship. The official records speak of a resilient, deeply traditional community, untouched by modern complexities, living in harmony with the land. They cite unusually high rates of longevity and good health among its inhabitants, seemingly unaffected by plagues or famines that swept other regions. Just good, honest folk living off the land, perhaps. A touch superstitious about their ancestors' rock piles, the historical societies might have concluded, compounded by a stubborn refusal to install proper roads or, God forbid, a decent cell tower. You know, hardy pioneers just a bit too committed to the off-grid aesthetic. A perfectly romantic, utterly terrifying dismissal of a profound, unnatural covenant. But the prosperity and peace of Graffin Valley weren't a blessing. They were a bargain. A very old, very dark pact forged centuries ago between its original settlers and something primordial that dwelled beneath the very stones of the cairns. Something that demanded not reverence, but sustenance. And the sustenance it truly craved wasn't grain or livestock. It was the vital spark of youthful life, the essence of potential, the very future of its people. They were cultivated, their potential ripened, and then in a chilling cyclical ritual, their lives were harvested. They say that when the valley mist is thickest just before the autumn equinox, you can still hear it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper rising from the ancient stones. The sound of a perpetual hunger patiently waiting for its next season's due. Our story centers on Dr. Isla Vance, an archaeologist specializing in megalithic structures and ancient societal rituals. Isla wasn't interested in dusty museum exhibits. She was fascinated by the living echoes of the past, the pervasive influences that could shape a culture's beliefs and practices. Her work involved analyzing old archaeological survey maps, deciphering cryptic folklore, and unearthing the suppressed sacrificial narratives of ancient communities. For Isla, the inexplicable patterns of continuous localized offerings and seemingly peaceful regions were always the most intriguing. Isla stumbled upon Graffin Valley while researching a historical anomaly consistent abnormally high numbers of ancient pre-Christian cairns documented in this specific region, far more than typical for the area, and all showing signs of continuous ritual use over millennia. The records were sparse, often handwritten in old explorers, journals, and early ethnographic studies, but they all pointed to Graffin Valley as a unique archaeological hotspot. There were also vague, unsettling mentions of the long sleep the valleys, dew, and the Earth's embrace terms that defied standard archaeological definitions. Further research into old local customs and oral histories yielded tantalizing fragmented clues. Vague mentions of the chosen of children who would ascend to the mist at certain ages, and of a collective amnesia that affected the entire community regarding these ascensions. These narratives were often heavily romanticized or dismissed as quaint provincial superstitions by later ethnographies. But Isla, with her knack for seeing the grim reality behind the poetic language, saw a chilling narrative emerging. A community that wasn't just worshiping its land, but feeding it their future eroded before they physically vanished. The peculiar, almost unnerving youthfulness of the current residents of Graffin Valley, despite the apparent absence of older generations, also caught her attention. They seemed perpetually in their prime, rarely showing signs of aging past middle age. It was the same unsettling vitality described in the ancient whispers about the valley's inhabitants. This wasn't just a historical mystery. It was an anthropological enigma, an archaeological anomaly, and a personal challenge for Isla. "Right," she muttered to her perpetually shedding and deeply cynical field assistant Socrates, a scruffy terrier mix who snored contentedly beside her. "Either this valley has discovered the secret to eternal youth, or I'm about to become intimately familiar with the definition of sacrificial lamb. Probably both, knowing my luck. For a woman whose life ambition involves digging up ancient pottery shards, I really do stumble into the strangest, most existentially inconvenient situations." Socrates just twitched an ear, clearly unimpressed by the impending supernatural field trip. The drive into Graffin Valley was surprisingly serene at first. Rolling green hills, ancient gnarled trees, and quaint stone farmhouses dotted the landscape. But as Isla approached the heart of the valley, a subtle change occurred. The air grew strangely still, the distant sounds of highways and modern life fading into an almost oppressive quiet. The valley itself, with its neat fields and a single proud church spire, had an unnerving stillness to its unmoving. Mist and silent paths, like a perfectly rendered diorama reflecting only the gray sky. There were no birds flitting through the trees, no buzzing insects, no distant farm machinery. The entire valley felt strangely muted, almost dead, despite its apparent vibrancy. She checked into the valley's only inn, a small, immaculately clean establishment, with a perpetually smiling, utterly serene proprietor. "Welcome to Graffin Valley, dear," the woman chirped, her voice soft, devoid of genuine warmth, yet oddly comforting. Isla noticed the woman's eyes clear, unblinking but like polished river stones, reflecting nothing. "Just sign here. Your room's upstairs. Dinner is at 7 though. Most folks like an early night." She chuckled, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. Isla accepted the key, her professional curiosity already piqued by the proprietor's unsettling demeanor. She settled into her room, which was equally clean and sterile, almost devoid of personality. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It felt less like an inn room and more like a carefully maintained exhibit. Her first few days were spent subtly observing the valley. She visited the small general store, the quiet church, and the surrounding farmlands. The residents were unfailingly polite, almost eerily so. They'd nod, offer a gentle smile, and respond to questions with vague, pleasant generalities. No one seemed to work too hard, yet everyone looked healthy and well-fed. Their eyes, however, shared that same unsettling serenity as the innkeeper's, a placid surface over an apparent void. She began her archaeological survey of the Cairns. These were massive ancient stone piles scattered across the valley, each one seemingly radiating a faint cold energy. Her geological and thermal imaging equipment detected strange non-natural energy signatures emanating from directly beneath the largest cairns. There was a faint rhythmic pulse, almost like a slow, deep heartbeat, resonating through the earth and eerily through the soles of her boots. And then she saw it on the imager's monitor. Not geological formations, but vast interlocking patterns of extreme cold, like an impossibly complex subterranean network far larger and deeper than any known natural system. It spanned acres directly beneath the most significant cairns, and from within its depths, the strongest energy signatures emanated. It was like a colossal, silent subterranean organism dreaming beneath the valley. As she moved her equipment closer, the image seemed to shift. A faint tremor passed through the ground, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible phenomenon registered on her sensitive acoustic sensors, a low resonant hum. Not a structural vibration, but a deep, pervasive oscillation that seemed to fill the entire audible spectrum, yet produced no discernible sound in the air. Isla felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just ancient geology. This was something else. The cold, damp earth, the oppressive. Quiet, the strange hum, it all began to coalesce into a profound sense of wrongness. She dismissed it as faulty sensors, as artifacts of the extreme age. Right, she mumbled, sipping lukewarm coffee. Either my cutting-edge million-dollar equipment is suddenly experiencing a dramatic, nervous breakdown, or this valley is actively trying to communicate. And honestly, for a prehistoric landmass, it's being remarkably passive-aggressive. If you want to talk Graffin, just say something. Don't give my thermal imager a panic attack. She tried to keep her voice steady, but a knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. Over the next few days, Isla meticulously documented the subsurface anomalies. The deeper she probed, the more pronounced the strange pulsating energy became. The hum intensified, becoming a constant low thrum that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. And the patterns from the thermal imager grew more unsettling. She discovered that the subterranean network was far more complex than mere rock formations. It seemed to expand and contract, almost breathing, and radiated a faint internal glow, a low malevolent pulsation that registered only on her most sensitive optical sensors, indicating a profound biological psychic energy. It was like a colossal silent organism dreaming within the very heart of the valley. More disturbing were the echoes she began to pick up on. Her advanced audio recorders, and sometimes on the high-resolution cameras embedded in her automated probes. Not physical distortions, but faint shifting spectral patterns, translucent shapes that seemed to drift through the underground. Network indistinct humanoid forms that would appear for a moment then vanish. They weren't mineral refractions. They were something else. She also started to feel a peculiar hunger, not for food but for vitality. An insatiable craving to send her probes deeper, to push the limits of her research, to understand the source of the hum, the nature of the echoes. She'd spend hours losing track of time, only emerging from the valley, blinking into the oppressive twilight, feeling drained yet oddly compelled. The hunger was a dull ache at first, then intensified, making her feel lighter, less substantial, and oddly more attuned to the subtle shifts in the valley's eerie stillness. She tried to dismiss it as academic obsession, a common affliction among dedicated researchers. Just the usual brain rot from too much deep earth analysis, and not enough human conversation, she'd mutter, forcing down another bland protein bar. probably also explains why I'm starting to think the giant underground organism is trying to send me telepathic grocery lists. Or perhaps just politely requesting a new batch of fresh blood. You know, for a sentient geological entity, it's being remarkably subtle about its communication needs. Her dry humor was becoming a desperate internal monologue, her only companion, the ceaseless hum of the valley. One evening, reviewing archived local legends and ancient tribal texts, she stumbled upon unsettling details. The valley's oldest tribes spoke of a great slumber of a powerful earth spirit demanding the brightest flowers to maintain the valley's peace. Vance's personal letters, dating back to the first European settlers, grew increasingly fixated on perfect harmony with the land, on sustaining the blessings, and on the ultimate covenant. His later letters were fragmented, filled with odd gaps. He spoke of a prior phenomenon, the quietening, where the initial occupants of the land had become withdrawn, their very life force draining. The valley's embrace, he called it. He described how young, vibrant individuals would eventually simply disappear, leaving no physical trace. One old tribal elder in a faded interview, his voice a reedy whisper, muttered, "It wasn't just the land that prospered. It was the hunger. The hunger was already eating our children from within." Isla felt a cold dread. The hum, the echoes, the fading youth. It all aligned. This wasn't just a valley. It was a place that had already begun to consume its inhabitants. Vitality long before modern records were kept. And the prosperity was not just a blessing. It was a chilling metaphor for the entity itself. She knew what she had to do. She had to understand the core of the perpetual harvest. The next phase of her research was different. Isla decided to use a specialized subterranean drone, one designed for navigating complex organic networks beneath the earth. She had to experience it with her own senses, however indirectly. The hunger for answers was a burning compulsion, overriding all caution. As the drone descended into the profound darkness beneath the valley, the hum intensified, vibrating through its very structure, resonating in Isla's own chest through the haptic feedback controls. The view outside the drone's cameras was thick, with compacted soil and interwoven tendrils, but as it neared the center of the energy signatures, a strange ethereal light began to emanate from the depths below. And then it appeared on the drone screen. Not a single object, but a vast organic network of thick pulsing tendrils, interwoven like an impossibly complex neural system, but clearly biological, radiating that soft internal glow. It was vast, ancient, and seemed to pulse with a silent, living energy. It was the true heart of Graffin Valley. As the drone approached, the whispers began. Not sounds in the air, but voices in her mind. Faint at first, then growing louder, emanating from the network itself. Grow, nourish, become. Earth. They were insidious, tempting whispers, promising ultimate understanding of life cycles, of profound connection to the earth, of the very nature of existence. It was the ultimate lure for an archaeologist, obsessed with ancient rituals and the land's secrets. But Isla felt the terrifying truth behind the promise. It was the erasure of the individual. Spirit, the absorption into a collective primordial consciousness. She thought of the old elder's words. The hunger was already eating our children from within. This wasn't a valley that merely nurtured life. It was a valley that consumed life by absorbing everything that rooted within it. The drone's internal systems began to flicker, its camera feed glitching. The hum was deafening in her mind, threatening to drown out her own thoughts. She felt herself being drawn closer, an irresistible pull, not physically but mentally. Her hands instinctively reached for the controls, but her limbs felt heavy, her movements sluggish. Then she saw it. In the reflective surface of the probe's own camera lens, her own reflection. But it wasn't quite right. Her eyes were too wide, too dark. Her mouth open in a slight, unnatural smile, and within the lens, a faint, translucent figure, indistinct, composed of swirling earth and shadowy forms. It had no discernible face, but its form was vaguely humanoid, its limbs seeming to extend into the very depths of the earth. It was the Fanes, the entity of consumption, the hunger that had taken Graffin Valley. The reflected Isla slowly reached out a hand, mirroring her own, but its touch was cold, absorbing. She recoiled, staring at the terrifying image. This wasn't a haunting. It was emerging. A consumption. The valley was the heart of the entity, drawing everything into its silent, hungry being. Well, this is rather inconvenient. Isla thought, a desperate, almost manic chuckle rising in her throat. Just when I thought I was having a dull day of geological surveying, turns out my reflection is trying to absorb my entire being into a giant root network. Very dramatic. You'd think after all this time, a sentient subterranean geological entity would at least learn some manners, or invest in better facial recognition. This one makes my nose look huge, and I'm about to be erased. Priorities, people. Her dark humor was a desperate, almost suicidal defiance against the creeping nothingness. Isla forced herself to remember the fragmented records, the whispers of the original Graffin Valley inhabitants. The great slumber, the loss of self. This curse wasn't about violence. It was about being drained, about sacrificing vitality. And the ultimate price was to become part of the collective amnesia, a silent echo in the Earth's unending hum. She understood. Now, the network wasn't just a geological system. It was the central node of the Fanes entity within Graffin Valley. It consumed memories, identities, and consciousness, specifically targeting the essence of youth and potential. And in doing so, it grew stronger, perpetuating its own existence by slowly integrating the very spark of human vitality into its boundless living consciousness. The whispers promised ultimate harmony with nature the perfect, assimilation into the Earth's cycles, but the price was the very self. She had to fight it not with force, but with individuality. Her own unique spark, her personal defiance. The specific unique quirks that made her Isla Vance. She pulled herself back from the drone, controls, her limbs heavy. She fumbled for her sealed emergency kit, pulling out a small worn photograph, a picture of her and her scruffy beloved terrier, Mick Socrates, looking slightly bewildered in a patch of wildflowers. It was a simple personal memory, utterly devoid of academic pursuit or grand theories. It was just a moment of pure, unadulterated affection and quiet companionship. She focused on that picture, on Socrates' perpetually skeptical expression, on the mundane comfort of his furry head resting on her lap. She concentrated on the feeling of his soft snores, the warmth of his presence. These were small, seemingly insignificant details, utterly personal, utterly hers. They were not universal knowledge. They were the anchors of her individual existence. The network pulsed violently. The whispers in her mind intensified, turning into a cacophony of distorted voices, all screaming, "Forget, release, surrender." The drone shook its connection, flickering. She slammed the laminated photo against the drone's control screen, pressing it directly against the point where her distorted reflection in the shadowy entity had appeared. A blinding flash of static erupted from the screen, followed by a deafening shriek that resonated through the tent. The underground network pulsed erratically, its internal glow flickering like a dying flame. The spectral figure of the Fames recoiled, from the screen dissolving into fragments of swirling earth and shimmering light. The overwhelming hum ceased. The pervasive cold dissipated, replaced by the normal chilling temperature of the night air. The drone's connection stabilized the screen, clearing. Isla collapsed against the controls, gasping for breath, her entire body aching. She was alive. She was herself. But Graffin Valley had shown her a horrifying truth. This wasn't just a local legend. It was a fundamental force of erasure. It shifted. It adapted. It consumed. And it would keep consuming quietly, relentlessly. Well, she gasped, her voice hoarse, a sliver of her old humor returning through the shock. That was a rather aggressive attempt at a vitality extraction. Definitely going to need therapy after this. And maybe a very long, very strong coffee. Or perhaps just a quiet existential crisis on a very, very hard sterile lab floor, far away from any ancient burial grounds. Definitely no mist. Sorry, Socrates. She gathered her equipment, packed her car, and drove away from Graffin Valley. The journey out felt strangely muted. The landscape, once breathtaking, now seemed unnaturally still. She saw no more visual echoes. The spectral figures were gone. The direct threat had receded. She reached the paved road, then the highway, and finally civilization. She stopped at the first bustling roadside diner she saw, pulling into the parking lot with a shuddering sigh. She felt an urge to talk, to explain, to scream her horrifying story. But as she looked at the other patrons, their faces bright, their laughter easy, she knew she couldn't. How could she explain a place that consumed vitality and youth when her own sense of vigor felt a little muted, her expressions a little less bright? She ordered coffee. When the waitress asked for her name, she hesitated for a long moment. She had to consciously search for it, pull it from a distant, almost forgotten corner of her mind. Isla, she finally managed the name, feeling foreign. Isla. Vance. She knew it was her name. She knew who she was intellectually. But the feeling, the sense of being Isla Vance, the passion, the quirks, the unique perspective, it was all muted. Like a photograph that had been left in the sun for too long, its colors faded, its edges blurred. She returned to her modest home. Socrates, her terrier mix, barked excitedly, wagging his tail furiously. Isla knelt, petting him mechanically. She felt a quiet companionship, a theoretical understanding of affection. But the spontaneous joy she usually felt was dampened. She was observing the emotion rather than fully experiencing it. She looked at her research, her meticulously organized archives. She knew what they were. She knew their archaeological significance. But the intense passion, the all-consuming obsession that had defined her life was gone. It had been part of the flavor she had deliberately shed. She was a blank canvas. She was present. She was Isla Vance, but she was a greatly reduced version. The entity hadn't fully consumed her, but it had taken a very large bite. She was a survivor, yes, but one who had paid a steep existential price. She tried to go back to her research, but the arcane texts felt less compelling. The thrill of discovery, once so potent, was now a mere intellectual exercise. She completed her report on Graffin Valley, a dry, factual account of its historical Cairns anomalies and alleged disappearances, carefully omitting any mention of pulsing underground organisms hungry entities, or the deliberate unraveling of her own soul. She couldn't. The words for it felt too grand, too vibrant for the muted person she had become. She sent the report. It was well received, lauded for its meticulous research. She got an offer for a new prestigious research position. She accepted. She would continue her work, but it would be work performed by a ghost of her former self. She continued to live, to function. She ate. She slept. She paid her bills. She took care of Socrates. But the hunger remained a faint phantom ache in her gut, a subtle echo of the entity that had almost consumed her. It was a reminder that parts of her were still missing, parts that might never return. And sometimes late at night, when the world was silent and the memory of the humming valley returned, she would catch her reflection in a dark window. And for a fleeting second, she would see something else. A flicker of something utterly blank. A void where her eyes should be, a ghost of the fame's hunger looking out. It was quickly gone, replaced by her own muted reflection. But she knew it was there. A lingering echo. A silent testament to the price of survival in a truly cursed state. Isla continued her work, traveling to other archaeological sites, meticulously documenting ancient structures and their hidden histories. She avoided valleys that felt too quiet, cairns that hummed with unnatural energy, and communities whose youth seemed eerily ageless. She became an expert in subtle anomalies, in the quiet absences in historical records, not because she sought them out, but because her sharpened senses, a grim gift from Graffin Valley, now instinctively recognized the scent of the truly cursed states. Her colleagues noticed her changes. She was still brilliant, still precise, but a certain spark had dimmed. Her enthusiasm was intellectual, never emotional. Her laughter was rare and often seemed to echo with a strange hollowness. She was admired, respected, but kept a subtle, almost imperceptible distance from personal connections. She could no longer afford the vibrant emotions that made one truly vulnerable to the creeping hungers of the world. She sometimes wondered about the chosen children of Graffin Valley, the ones who would ascend to the mist. Were they consumed entirely, or did a fragment of their potential, their youthful spark, continue to exist within the vast, dreaming consciousness of the subterranean entity? Did they become part of the fames, silently nourishing the land that had taken them? The thought chilled her, a constant reminder of the fine line between being and being consumed. Years turned into decades. Isla grew older gracefully, but without the usual telltale signs of profound aging that etched lines of joy or sorrow onto others' faces. Her face remained serene, her eyes clear, almost ageless, much like the eternally youthful residents of Graffin Valley. The price she had paid for her escape wasn't just a muted personality, it was a subtle, prolonged absorption into the very phenomenon she had survived. She was not consumed, but she was maintained. She found herself almost instinctively leaving small symbolic offerings near ancient markers, even in distant lands. Not to appease a god, but to acknowledge a truth she now carried within her, that the earth had its own hungers, and some of them were far older and more profound than human. Comprehension. A tiny polished stone, a sprig of fresh herbs, a single vibrant flower, small gestures almost imperceptible, a quiet pact with the lingering shadow of the fames. Her final years were spent in a quiet cottage far from any ancient sites, with Socrates, who against all odds seemed to defy the natural aging process himself, remaining remarkably spry and observant until her last days. A small, comforting mystery. One quiet autumn evening, as the first frost touched the leaves outside her window, Isla felt the familiar hum. Not in her bones, but deep within the earth, resonating across miles, across the very fabric of the world. It was fainter now, almost a memory of a sound. She looked at her reflection in the dark window pane. Her face, serene and ageless, stared back. And for a fleeting moment she saw it not a distortion, but a subtle deepening in her eyes, a shadow that hinted at a vast ancient hunger that looked out for just a flicker through her own pupils. It was quickly gone, replaced by her quiet reflection. But she knew the curse of Graffin Valley hadn't been defeated. It had simply shifted its focus, extended its reach. It was a perpetual echo resonating through the land, waiting for new sources of vitality. And Isla, the survivor, had become a subtle living conduit of its truth. Because some curses, dear listener, don't just happen to a place. They are the place. They absorb the very essence of what they touch, growing stronger, more cunning, more profoundly insidious. They become a constant, quiet hum beneath the surface of reality, demanding an unending, perpetual harvest. And in a cursed state like Graffin Valley, where youth is the bait and curiosity the ultimate trap, the greatest horror isn't being haunted. It's realizing that you've just become part of the very story you are trying to understand. And that the next season's due might be the silent, ageless echo of your own lost vitality.